Um, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. My name's Emily Shaw. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Council for International Visitors. GCIV is a nonprofit organization that works with the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs within the State Department on international exchange programs. Our mission is to build relationships between the people of our state and international leaders so that every Georgian has the opportunity to be more globally engaged. We've been in existence for over 58 years and have worked to create understanding and support foreign policy goals here and abroad. For example, in 2019, we hosted 48 delegations with over 670 international visitors representing 131 different countries through the State Department's International Visitor Leadership Program, also known as the IVLP, which is the premier professional exchange program, as well as other exchanges like Fulbright. These inbound professional, cultural, and educational exchanges represent a number of topics from refugee resettlement, civil and human rights, journalism, entrepreneurship, and public health. 2020 has looked a little bit different, but we are looking forward to connecting our international visitors with Georgia leaders through a virtual platform in the coming months. GCIV is a member-based organization, and we could not operate without the support of our members and donors, so please consider joining GCIV and participating in a number of other international focused opportunities we'll be offering throughout the year and next. You can also visit our website, gciv.org, and follow us on Facebook or LinkedIn for more information. Today, we are joined by Foreign Service Officer Christine Dal Bello, currently stationed in Brussels, for a discussion on diplomacy in the national parks. Christine has served with the Foreign Service for nearly 20 years, and she recently completed a sabbatical fellowship in partnership with the Una Chapman Cox Foundation focused on national parks. She visited more than 85 units of the national park systems, I believe in 29 states and 2 territories, to promote the importance of historical, cultural, and natural preservation, as well as diplomacy. At the conclusion of her presentation, we will open up for question and answers. You can raise your hand by clicking the participant icon at the bottom of your screen, and I can unmute you, or you can type your question into the chat box, and we'll try to get to all the questions today. We are recording the presentation, and I'll be sending it to all of you later. So again, thank you all for joining us today, and I'll open the floor up to you, Christine.
Hi, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here today, or virtually from a different continent. I have been very honored to be a Foreign Service Officer for, I just celebrated my 18th anniversary on September 10th. We started the day before September 11th, so it's kind of, etched in our memories, because we were just a few miles from the Pentagon that day. So I've been a public diplomacy officer for about half of my tours. And at my last foreign posting, I was the public affairs officer at the U.S. consulate in Dubai. So we were lucky to be able to help recruit a lot of the IVLPs that made their way to the United States, some to you all. And we would provide a briefing, before they go, to kind of prepare them, and then do a debrief on the way back. But of course, I always envied them because we never got to be with them on their trip. But they would always come back, telling us how much they learned, how much they enjoyed meeting Americans. The home hospitality was always like a great, one of their highest points of the trip, the details that they would share, the cultural visits as well. So I'm very grateful to all of you for, hosting the IVLPs and, showing America to them, because it really does have a huge impact. So I did something pretty unusual, like for an assignment in the State Department. There's only 2 of these sabbatical fellowships every year, and so it's a pretty open fellowship. You kind of put in a proposal. So people have done all sorts of things, writing books. The other person this year interviewed diplomatic, leaders, many ambassadors, what about their careers, kind of, and I think his book is going to be kind of like the training manual for like the future Foreign Service officers. But I had kind of grown interested in national parks by virtue of coming back to the United States for home leave. And then when I was posted into the UAE, we were there 2 back-to-back assignments. And it was very hot there in the summer. So I would bring back my children to either summer camp or spend time with my parents in California, because, just it was exceedingly hot in the summer there. So I'd always try to plan when they kind of got a little older, like around 8 years old, these kind of road trips. And so I have to say, I didn't focus on national parks on these road trips, but then I just kind of, by accident, kind of went to a couple of them, and I was like, wow, there's so much here to discover. And then the very first road trip was actually from West Virginia to Nashville. And then that summer I visited friends in Vermont, and I was like, let's see what's around here. So we went to the one in Vermont and one in New Hampshire. And then I was back home in California. And I'm embarrassed to say, grew up in California, 0 to 18, and my parents still live in our town. I knew about the Channel Islands because we could see them from my town of Santa Barbara. I had never been there. I always thought it was too hard. It was because I couldn't go from Santa Barbara, like the launch point kind of is just 45 minutes south. And so I finally went to Channel Islands National Park. And I don't even think I realized it was a national park. It became one in the early 80s. So, not since I was, born, but basically since I could remember it was a national park, and I had no idea. So that is why I kind of decided to focus this fellowship year on the national parks. And, the mission of the national parks is to preserve, I'm quoting, unimpaired the natural and cultural resources and values of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. And so, a lot of people think, like I did, Yosemite and Yellowstone, but there's so many more national parks. So I'll start my presentation, and let's see, bear with me, and here we go. Okay. So a lot of times, this is the same photo that's behind me. When you think of a national park, this is kind of the image, that you kind of see in your mind. But before I get into a little bit more, one of my second road trip was actually, we started out in Georgia, in Atlanta, and we got there late at night. Well, not that late, but by the time we got out of the airport, it was getting dark. But a colleague had told me, the historic site is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s crypt is outside, and there's still things to see. So even though it's closed officially, we still got to see quite a bit. This is the Jimmy Carter National Historic Site. These are my kids from the back being, sworn in as junior rangers. And it's interesting, this was several years ago, but look at the big bottle of Purell standing there at the counter, very prescient. In Andersonville, Georgia. So I only made it to a few. It was kind of a really whirlwind trip. We basically, I think it was about 10 days, and we went from Atlanta, ending up in Kansas City, and we took the train from there to Los Angeles. So definitely more to visit. I actually had hoped to go back and to do a very long road trip through, practically every state in the spring, summer, but because of COVID, it didn't happen. So when most people think of national parks, they think of the trees behind me, or some of these famous sites. This is Yellowstone. we went in the winter, Old Faithful erupting. If you can get to Yellowstone in the winter, I would highly recommend it. I'm not a big snow person or winter person, and someone described it as a snow, being inside a snow globe, and it was really truly special. Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, and then other images, kind of like classic. This is Thunderhole, Acadia. So we're getting to almost like a year anniversary. So we were actually in Acadia in mid-October during fall foliage. So this is what a lot of people, think when they think national parks. They don't, Haleakala in Hawaii, the famous one, Bryce Canyon. So they don't think about the other 357 units of the national park system. And there's 62 national parks that have that designation, but there are so many more. And it's not something I realized until I kind of started researching, this trip. Also, there's 599 natural landmarks, plus all the public lands that are managed by BLM, U.S. Forest Service. There's plus state parks, of course, city parks, county parks. There's just so much there. And I think especially during these, more challenging times that, do try to explore what you can, in your immediate, environment. And I know, it took me so long, 40 years to discover Channel Islands National Park, but even all the times I'd gone to visit my parents in Santa Barbara, I hadn't gone on all the trails because we're basically mountains behind us and there's a national forest. And I'd been to a couple of hiking trails, but not all of them. And I hadn't been to all the city and county parks. And I still haven't. There's still more to discover. So this kind of gives you kind of a visual idea of how what the breadth of the National Park Service. So in approaching this year, I wanted to focus on the lesser known sites, and also in sites that I felt or that had connections to diplomacy. And before embarking on the trip, there were a couple that had been suggested to me: the San Juan Islands in Washington State, Jimmy Carter National Historic Site because it shaped him as a person, and the Eisenhower National Historic Site because he interfaced and entertained many world leaders there. However, as I went along, I learned more and more and found more connections. So including this one, this is Secretary Baker and former Foreign Minister Edward Shevardnadze. They basically had a pre-summit meeting at Grand Teton National Park in, I believe it was 1989. And so this is something, as I was researching and visiting these parks, I kind of divided them, the ones that were connected to diplomacy, in kind of 3 categories. And this fits in the category of the fact that some of these parks, they're very beauty inspire individuals to be their best selves and strive for cooperation and peace. And I felt like this one fit into that category because they were in these just kind of perfect surroundings. They went fishing together. They talked about their families. I mean, it was so successful. I think he invited Secretary Baker over to the Soviet Union for a follow-on meeting. And then it was described in the New York Times as more productive than most of the meetings between American and Soviet foreign ministers in recent years. Moscow summit meeting last year between President Ronald Reagan and President Gorbachev. So the very site kind of was inspiring. And then another site that kind of I felt fell in this category is Muir Woods, and that is actually a modern photo is behind me in the backdrop. This is actually an historical photo from a ceremony that took place there, and I'm going to share with you a video that the UN United Nations Association Marin County chapter put together.
Today, in the very heart of Muir Woods National Monument, a bronze plaque quietly reminds visitors that an event of international significance took place here amid the profound silence and serenity of the ancient redwoods as World War II was coming to an end. But 75 years ago, the world was at war, our nation mourning the loss of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Recently sworn in, President Truman's first decision was to proceed with the San Francisco Peace Conference. And so, on April 25th, 1945, 268 delegates representing 46 nations gathered in San Francisco to open the first session of the United Nations Conference. The atmosphere was solemn. The delegates worked hard on difficult issues. On May 19th, they took time off to honor the memory of FDR, a lover of trees, with a walk and ceremony among the peaceful, timeless redwoods of Muir Woods.
So I had no idea that that this event had taken place until I actually visited Muir Woods, and I was just talking to the dose. It was actually a volunteer about my project, and he's like, "Oh, check out Cathedral Grove," which is actually where this took place. And this is a letter. It wasn't intended to obviously be a memorial service to President Roosevelt. It was intended to be a time for them to reflect, because they were doing very important work, as the video was saying, and they thought that bringing the delegates to this Temple of Peace kind of would inspire them to get their work to the finish line. So it was the 75th anniversary of the ceremony this year, and then of course the signing of the UN Charter. So both of those sites, I think, fit into this category of like how the actual beauty can serve as inspiration, and that the sense of how small we are as individuals in the face of such immense beauty and trees that have stood there for so long. Then I found also sites that celebrated peaceful resolution through the promotion of through diplomacy. So one site like that is Chamizal National Memorial. It's in El Paso. A colleague actually told me about this site. I hadn't heard of it before. And we went there, I think it was December. It was rainy, as you can see. This is the mural that, very beautiful mural outside the visitor center. It's a very different type of park. It's an urban park with performing space inside. It's really meant to kind of honor the border cultures of both countries, but it's there to commemorate the successful resolution of a border conflict that had gone on for more than 100 years, because the border is the river, and it had shifted course over time. And so it kind of had been really damaging the U.S.-Mexico relationship for a long time. And then with kind of the Cold War as a backdrop, President Kennedy thought that this was something that he really needed to focus on. And he went to Mexico, and he and the Mexican president decided that they would work towards resolution of this conflict. Unfortunately, President Kennedy died before it kind of came to resolution. But President Johnson, this is actually one of the old border markers. they signed the treaty, and then they had a very kind of big ceremony. President Johnson and Dan El Paso. This is them, doing the big handshake and the big visual. And you can, this is in the visitor center, they have a modest mock-up that you can kind of recreate your own handshake. Then there were sites that I found that celebrated, trailblazers, history-making individuals, including those with success in the diplomatic sphere, and thereby that work inspires others to work, for peace. And we were in Washington for the first few weeks of the fellowship, and we went to the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site. This is a photo of him through the ages. But I didn't realize until we were on the tour that he was actually basically our ambassador, our minister to Haiti. This is a kind of a rendering of him in Haiti. I mean, he was an amazing individual on so many levels. He was an abolitionist, suffragist, author, editor, diplomat, orator, success in many fields, but including the diplomatic sphere. His home on Cedar Hill. Then this other site, the Clara Barton National Historic Site, this was also one that I only learned about kind of when I was visiting. I was reading a sign, and it mentioned, so her home, it's her former home, and it was also the headquarters of the American Red Cross. She's the founder of the American Red Cross. And it's just outside Washington, Glen Echo, and it's in Maryland, just over the border. And I was reading one of the signs, and it said that, she had been in Europe and, had heard about the International Red Cross, and she wanted to have America join this organization. And she founded the American National Red Cross in 1881. And one of the association's first goal was to secure the ratification of the Geneva Convention by the US. And she lobbied Congress this is a letter that she wrote to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to do so. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then this is actually one of the parks in Vermont that I mentioned that I went, after my first kind of regional road trip. And this is the Marsh Billings Rockefeller National Historic Park. This is George Perkins Marsh. He's considered the father of the conservation movement, and is credited by many to have come up with the idea of sustainability. And he grew up in Vermont and saw kind of like the negative impact of deforestation in the land around him. He later was appointed to be minister to Italy, our ambassador there. And he was served there for 21 years. And when he was there, he saw the impact of European deforestation and saw how Europeans were, grappling with this and coming up with land management. And both of these experiences in Vermont and Italy impacted his thinking and writing. And his seminal work is called Man and Nature, published in 1864, and it changed people's perceptions of the relationship between humans and the land. So those three sites are all ones that I thought, connected to individuals that, they were either they themselves did diplomat or involved in the diplomatic sphere. That's actually his boyhood home and one of the main buildings at the site. So then now I want to talk a little bit about the Office of International Service. So they do a lot of, as the name implies, a lot of outreach to the world, and they work with different countries and different park systems. And one of their programs is the Sister Park program. So there's not one in Georgia, but this is relatively close in the Smoky Mountains. I believe there's about 60 sister parks, but some of them are, some that Yosemite has multiple ones, so it's not like 60 individual ones. But they run, each park kind of has its own individual relationship with the sister park. But the Office of International Affairs is doing a lot of great work. Like right now, they're working very closely with China on establishing its national park system. Or they also do consultation and technical training, and they also help us, the State Department, when we run our own programs related to national parks. And when I was in Dubai, I requested a speaker to come to talk about national parks. That was connected to our Discover America event that was kind of spearheaded by the Department of Commerce, like our Foreign Commercial Service. So it was like promoting tourism. So we did like a public event, the screening of National Parks Adventure, which was Robert Redford narrated and was, you know, an IMAX movie. So we actually had it in an IMAX theater, and it just showed the beauty of a lot of the national parks and also the history. And the Minister of Environment of the UAE came to it, and then we had a series of really great meetings with different elements of the UAE government and emirate level, like state level governments, about national parks and how we could work together. Not just national, but also like state level. The UAE is a lot smaller, so it's kind of hard to explain. And then, you know, for all of you, I'm sure some of you like have been to many of them. I'm not like, but for those who haven't, you know, I encourage you. I find that the NPS website is the best place to start, nps.gov, and you can search by state, and then it'll give you a description of each one. I just pulled it up for Georgia. And I think there's these aren't all official National Park Service units, but they're all like within the National Park Service family. So there's quite a large number in Georgia, and at least 10 different like designations. So you have seashore, you have military parks, you have heritage areas. And it was just interesting timing, because today I got a note about the National Association of Interpretation. So like docents and people who with the public on historical sites, and also at nature sites as well. And their national conference is coming up in November, and the director of the Gulag Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor is their lead speaker, along with the former head of the National Park Service, Heather Hodges. There are also 11 national natural landmarks in Georgia as well. So I did not know about the national natural landmarks about the US. Sometimes I was like literally driving, and I would see kind of a brown sign or something that indicated that there was, you know, something of note coming up. And I later found out that a lot of them were national natural landmarks. So I encourage you to check these out as well. During COVID, you know, things are quite a bit different. Each park has its own, you know, it's really dependent on what's happening in the local and state level. They have a great campaign right now. It's like, you know, the hashtag Recreate Responsibly. I just thought this is a funny way for them, you know, to kind of get people's attention about, you know, staying physically apart. They, I think, have been great at adapting to kind of this new normal. A lot of the times the park rangers are outside, so they're able to speak to you and to still communicate and do everything that they would do, but just in a different way of doing it. Some of the visitor centers are closed, some of the buildings are closed. It's all, so if you are planning a trip, go on the website and look at the kind of the changes to like normal operations. I think I mentioned at the beginning that my kids had done the Junior Ranger program at Jimmy Carter National Historic Site. And a lot, I think probably my 50th park, I realized that also adults could do the program. And, you know, everyone's different. I find that I learn a lot more if I work on it with my kids or do it myself. And you can, at some parks, it's become so popular that they've designed adult level programs, or for elders, like one in Hawaii, they called it the kapuna, like it was like the, you know, for elders or something. And in Biscayne National Park, some some park enthusiasts worked with the ranger there to come up with a program for adults. It's like the a coral reef ranger program, and it was designed for adults. So there's over 400 junior programs, and a lot of them can be done online, even pre-COVID. A lot of them were online. I just took this shot because this is also another national park site with a connection to diplomacy. Mountain Park is home to Camp David. So the crossword here discusses this a little bit. You can't visit Camp David, obviously, unless you're invited. Special invitation. But just another example of the site. This is the picture of my daughter getting, usually you get a little badge, but I to this day, Jimmy Carter National Historic Site gave extra goodies, a water bottle and like this like medal that she's receiving. They were very generous. So we'll never forget. We'll never forget it. And then one thing that we've done to kind of help us, it served two purposes. One kind of it was like an audio log, kind of an audio photo album or whatever for ourselves. I brought along, actually I have it right here, this audio recorder. Oops. And so since the beginning of the trip, we were recording, and then kind of in the spring, especially under lockdown, that's when we started kind of putting the podcast episodes together. So the idea was to share some of the more unique stories, these overlooked stories. That's another thing, is I visited a lot of these national parks. I was shocked at how little I knew about our history, how much of our history we didn't know about. I feel like every time I go to a national park, I can read 5 books and still just on that one site and still not know it all. So this is just, our modest attempt to try to, inspire others to follow like the junior ranger model of like explore, learn, and protect. So that's the junior ranger model. I think it's applicable for all ages. And another thing is, I don't have it with me, but another way that you can, engage with the park sites is by getting a passport. It's a little booklet that comes with a map of all the different park sites, and you can stamp, get a stamp at all the different destinations. Some people are very into it. There's actually the National Parks Traveler Clubs that started so people could share information about where they got the stamps and what they look like and everything. So some people are very into this. And the National Park Travelers Club, the NPTC, they actually have special awards for those who reach 100 parks. And quite a few people get to all 419 parks, including a family last year, or it might have been the year before. And their one of their children is like the youngest person to have ever visited all 419 parks. It's the Maitland family. I think they're from Michigan. And what I found extremely interesting was that they had 2 different sets of exchange students that traveled with them in their RV during their exchange year to visit these parks. So also international exchange happening. And then we try to kind of touch on episodes or on subjects that kind of have a relationship to diplomacy or State Department or international exchange. And in this one was specifically about a J1 program, the summer work travel program, because I'd met a lot of the summer work travel program participants, but they were always working. So I never got a chance to really talk to them in depth, but we were able to do a few interviews via Zoom. So that was our last one. And that's about it. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you so much. It's really interesting. I have a few questions. Did you have a favorite national park and why?
It's like choosing like which is your favorite children, like, and some people say, oh, it's the next one, or I think I'll always have a special connection like Channel Islands National Park, just in the sense that I'm so directly connected to it from growing up there. And it's a reminder that you not to take things for granted, and also to do a little bit of research, because I knew it wasn't that hard, but I think that that's like the common trap that people fall into. Here I was traveling to, like, I think I've been to 100 different countries, right? So far through my foreign service career, and just loving international travel. And I had seen a lot of the US, I think 40 plus states now, but there was so much I hadn't seen, even in my own town. And so I would say that's my strongest connection.
How do the national park represent America to our foreign visitors?
I think in a lot of different ways, and I think it really depends on like the perspective of the individual and where they're coming from too. I mean, I think we're blessed. I think a lot of visitors are surprised by how much land is protected, and we're very blessed in America to have a lot of space, so it's a bit easier for us to protect it. But I think the very concept of, I mean, it really made an impression on me. This is our collective land, that we all own it. And some of the rangers would very much emphasize that. I remember in Everglades, he gave us a great tour. It was like 2.5 hours long. And then he ended with a very strong thank you to us, even though he had done everything to that point, for visiting, our lands, or our park, and making sure it was okay. And I think that is pretty impressive. And that when you're in the park, it's equal access to all. You can go camping. You can't have like a better experience by paying. Okay, maybe like you have to. There's lodges inside the park, and you do have to pay. But these are often there are concessions run by the National Park Service, and there are kind of limits. So it's pretty kind of equal opportunity. And I should say that I think a lot of people think that they can be expensive, and the ones that you hear about most often, they do have like $30, parking fees and things like that. But that's just a very small number that have such large, the most popular ones that get a lot of visitation. Most of the ones I visited were free, and I bought a pass. It's an $80 pass, and it's good. It's an interagency pass, so it's good for a lot of different lands. And then I should also mention that I think military veterans and active military and their families get a free pass. Fourth graders, it started with every kid in the park, and now it's every kid outdoors. They get a free pass, and the idea is for them to be kind of in charge and planning for their family. So, and there are a lot of different days that will have free admission as well. I think September 26th, for example, I believe it's Public Lands Day, and that's a free admission day. So there's several, I think about 6 scattered through the year.
A lot of we try to send most of our IVLP participants to the MLK historic site, and they find it extremely impactful. Did any of the participants you debriefed or chose for the IVLP in your career ever mention it? Or
I don't think anyone had been to Georgia that I'm aware of, but a very specific,
you need to push for that.
Yeah, well, a very specific Georgia connection, or at least Martin Luther King connection, was when I was in India. I didn't know until I was there that Dr. Martin Luther King had come to India and had done a big tour, and it was very influenced by what he learned in India. So we actually, the mission, it was spearheaded by a team up in Delhi, and we had a congressional delegation. I think it was Senator Baucus and the delegation. So, I mean, really powerful, group. And they went all over India, kind of retracing Dr. Martin Luther King's steps. So, and that's the thing, like there's so many connections that you you don't know about until you're like there, or you hear about it.
Right. So one of our board members asked how well maintained are the national parks these days?
So there, I think there's quite a large backlog of like maintenance, but I think a lot of times as a visitor, you might not see that. They just passed the Great American Outdoors Act, and that's supposed to do many things, including address the maintenance. I mean, I personally thought they were, quite well maintained. For sometimes though, at some of the smaller parks, the videos of, that you find in the visitor center are not, they're a little dated, or, they don't have the latest kind of, the exhibits haven't been refreshed in a while. And a lot of that also stems from different parks have different friends organizations. So some of them can bolster kind of the coffers through, different by fundraising and then sharing that. But I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say, I mean, I was always pretty impressed.
And does every country have their own like national park system?
I don't know. I don't have there are definitely many countries that have their different national park systems, but I'm not sure if every country does. That was something I kind of had wanted to look more into. I just wasn't able.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. So, did you have any misconceptions before you started your sabbatical about national parks that changed?
That's a good question. I think I didn't expect to learn kind of quite as much, and to find that, like, I already knew from visiting the parks that like sometimes like my perception or what I learned in history class wasn't, all that was there, right? Like I had only like a narrow window into kind of an American history. So I think I learned how much, I kind of already mentioned it, how much I still have to learn, that there are so many aspects of history that have been overlooked or underreported. And one thing that really kind of wasn't really made a huge impression was going to Rosie the Riveter. I think it's a long name. Rosie the Riveter National World War II Home Front. It's in the Bay Area, and it is home to the National Park Service's oldest ranger, Betty Reed Soskin, who's 98. I think she's going to turn 99 next week. And after meeting her, we were able to do a Q&A. Like, she had a stroke last year, so she's not there as much as she was.
I think she's making her own Rosie the Riveter masks.
Yeah, and I know it's her birthday next week, and she's doing a kind of an event to encourage people to register and get out to vote. And so she was very much like, and then she's written a book, and it's called Sign My Name to Freedom. And it's very much like, history is written by the people that were in the room. And so she was actually working for, I think it was a state representative. So she was involved in setting up the park. And the big challenge in like presenting this history was that a lot of the African-American history had been erased, because there was great migration because they needed the work, and all the kind of structures have been erased. So like how you present the history when you don't have the physical structures, and that would kind of underrepresented groups, they're kind of, those physical structures have been erased. So it was very interesting to perspective. And so anyways, she's incredible. I would highly recommend. There's a couple documentaries on her in the book as well.
Well, thank you. How do you define a connection to diplomacy within the national parks? You said, I guess
Yeah,
you
I know.
had 3 categories, and I only got the beauty one. What were your others?
Commemorating sites to celebrate like an actual resolution through diplomacy, so like Chamizal. And then the third one was commemorate the sites that celebrate history-making individuals that have connections to diplomacy. But the more I got into this and the more I asked people, you could make, more connections. Sites that, like, for example, like the Lewis and Clark, someone was like, did they kind of function as de facto diplomats as they were exploring the United States? The military, battlefields, was that diplomat, it hadn't worked, so there's just so many, the Native Americans, like that they're different states and, so yes, it's a difficult, depending on how you define it, the number could be much, much higher, because these parks kind of are a reflection of our history. And because the national parks designation is designated, it has to be passed by Congress, but the president has a lot of latitude to declare these as parks or as national monuments, or so they really are kind of a reflection of what a president or that time that he serves in office, what he considers important and what society considers important. So
So you mentioned the San Juan Islands at the beginning of your presentation.
yeah, so that I didn't get to. That was supposed to be my one of my trips. Like I actually had it was going to also be a train journey. It was up to Seattle, and then I was going to do the Empire Builder across to Chicago, but didn't get to do that. In any case, San Juan Islands, there was like a pig war. Like there was a British and American presence, and they averted a war through diplomacy. So, but I'll get there someday. And that's the thing. I mean, that was one thing, like that, because these are preserved sites, they'll still be there next year, 10 years,
Right.
20 years. One of the groups that I'm on, he because there's a lot of national park enthusiasts, and there are, a lot of photograph sharing and things. So he posted a picture that his father had taken in the Badlands. I think it was like in the 1950s or 60s. And he was like, and this is the photo I just took, this week. And they were the same. Things do change, but I mean, thanks to the kind of the conservation, the preservation, and the management of the Park Service to preserve unimpaired for future generations, they do look and they managed to keep them as to the original way.
Are there any places, in your opinion, that should be national parks that aren't?
I mean, that's the thing. I think that I kind of almost felt a little guilty about, like, why did I pick national parks? Because I think I didn't really appreciate how many other kind of categories there were. The national natural landmarks, the state parks. So, I mean, in some ways it's a bit of a problem, because it's not really a problem, but some people kind of collect parks and they only go after the 62 parks, right? And they're kind of on and some people say, well, it's just an easier number to achieve than 419. And, whatever motivates people to kind of get out there and see it. But I think that's the thing. Like, I mean, even though I am talking about national parks and my project was on national parks, it's like, don't focus on the designation or the title, like just find out find what's around you and try to appreciate it. Because it can be, there can be like the most amazing pieces of history and something that hasn't even been, declared and protected yet. And that's another thing that I really was impressed by, finding more about the stories of how these places became protected. And often a lot of them were from a group of citizen diplomats, citizen activists, that like, this is special. We need to protect this. And, they got a local group, together, and they lobby Congress or they lobby, different officials, the president, so that is something that I think that we can all learn from, that citizenship is not just, voting every year. There's so many other ways to become involved. And on a local level, I never appreciated also the different the land trusts. Like in my town, a lot of the land is protected from a land trust, like people coming together with smaller amounts of money to buy up the land and protect it. So there's just so many ways, to become involved, and everyone that I've talked to that is like somehow, working or very connected to a park, whether it be national, state, or local, visitation in and of itself serves as a support mechanism, because that is needed to like, it kind of it reflects the value of the park. Like every year, the statistics come out on how many visitors have come to the park, and then they extrapolate, what the economic impact of those visitors were on the area. Just like I've seen similar for like the different international visitors and their impact on the local bodies, and that really does make a difference in kind of continuing funding for these different parks or programs, international exchange programs.
What kind of impact did the national parks have on your children? I mean, I know about the junior ranger program, but
yeah, no, I think they were not necessarily, they were drafted into this. It was not something they were like, they signed up for. I think that they appreciated it. It's something they're probably still processing. They're going to kind of realize more later. But I mean, we did see quite a varied amount of places and types. And so I think they're very much aware of how different regions of America are, and how much I think that they still have to learn as well.
Yeah. So what was your greatest discovery during your sabbatical?
Let's see. Besides how ignorant I am, like, I mean, that kind of time and again, I was like, how do I not know this? Like, how could I not know that? We were visiting, for example, White Sands in it was a national monument, now it's a national park, and it's kind of a natural, it's protected because of its natural significance. It's like the largest because it's gypsum sand. But then when we were there, like the ranger just mentioned, the Trinity, there was like an atomic bomb test site on the grounds as well. And so it's like I had no, I knew that it had happened, but I didn't know where it had happened. So I guess just that there's kind of so many different connections, and that you can't just take things at face value, and you really have to dive into it and learn more. Like another time, like Shenandoah National Park, I'd been there 2 or 3 times, and then only this time, I don't know, I was like reading a little bit more carefully, and there's Camp Rapidan, which is Herbert Hoover's kind of retreat, and he had entertained world leaders there too, so it was another kind of connection to kind of diplomacy, but I had no idea from my previous visits. So just to explore more where you are, but explore more deeply as well.
So I know your trip was cut short by COVID? Are you gonna be able to continue your fellowship? And how has COVID changed national parks and diplomacy? What impact has
Right.
it had?
Well, it's interesting. Like I just saw a headline that the Yellowstone visitation numbers, I think for August, came out, and it was higher than it was for the previous year.
Wow.
So there are, there are a lot of people still visiting national parks, and then actually, and some people are saying like it's kind of because international travel is very difficult, if not impossible. More people are focused on also like in some ways you can if you the way you depending on how you do it and camping and things like that in RV you can kind of distance. So I think that in a lot of ways the kind of national parks have been kind of gain more prominence during this time. We had to take we don't have a place in the United States, so we were staying with my family, and then we went to visit my husband's family, and then we flew out back to Dubai through Chicago. So we did 2 small road trips, during COVID. And it, in some ways it hadn't changed. Like if you're in the back country or surrounded by just the natural beauty or where, like you would never know what's going on, so.
Yeah, I definitely still have a lot to learn.
Yeah. So, that you just they were kind of advising people to stay, closer to home, but there are still a lot of things that you can visit.
Well, again, I appreciate it. It was a great conversation, and thank you to our audience again for all the great questions. I guess if you would mind sharing your link to the podcast, I'm sure people would like to follow up, maybe follow that. And,
Okay. And
anyone
thank you to Josh. I'm just seeing that now that he went to Gettysburg. Oh,
yeah, Josh, if you want me to unmute you, you can talk a
yeah.
little
No,
bit
thank
more.
you for that. See, I the one of that thing.
Oh, no, I can't figure out how to unmute him. Well, again,
And
thank
yes,
you.
oh, so Teresa mentioned, I think that Waterden Glacier Peace Park. I think that's the one. They share a border, or yeah. I've been at Glacier, but we didn't get to go to the Canadian side. That was another trip. Sorry, I didn't see these until now. Thank you all. Yes, and Josh, what Josh says, they went from National Historic Site to National Historical Park, and that was very much thanks to Representative Lewis. I think he was the one that was instrumental in getting that legislation passed.
Well,
Thank
thanks
you very
to
much.
the audience, and please, I'll be sending out the recording, and let me know if you have any other interests in our virtual programs. And Christine, I hope you stay in touch, and good luck
No,
in
thanks. And
your.
if any of you, thank you for those who shared tips and like connections. And if you have any others, or I'm hoping to continue the podcast because I still have a lot of recordings to go through, and there's some left. So any suggestions, I'm all ears.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, are you working at all with the IVLP in Dubai?
So I should say that I finished my assignment in Dubai, let's say in, when was it, 2019. And then I had this fellowship year. And now I'm in Brussels working actually at NATO, so something very different.
Okay.
But one thing about Dubai, I know Global Ties is helping to recruit youth ambassadors for the Expo 2020, which is now going to be in 2021. And
Right,
I'm a
we are
personal fan.
recruiting for that as well,
Yeah.
and cultural performers. So
Yes, and I would just, highly recommend to anyone in your life that is of that age range to encourage them to apply, because it is an amazing experience. I went to the 2015 Expo in Milan, and then 2017 in Astana, and just incredible. In fact, my original plan had been to go back to Dubai because my husband was working there, and take time off, like take a year off and just spent a lot of time visiting the expo, but because it got postponed and then COVID, and I was able to get this job. But I do plan to go back next year, and I would highly recommend, travel restrictions aside and safety aside, if travel is allowed next year, that you try to plan a visit yourselves. It's, I think, going to be October 2020 to April 2021, in addition to encouraging all the young people in your life to apply to be youth ambassadors, because the youth ambassadors really are the driving kind of engine of the American pavilion, especially in Astana. They were such a credit to the country and to their families and their educational institutions, because they were just great ambassadors. And that's the thing, whether we like it or not, we're all, ambassadors, lowercase ambassadors, when we're
and they've
overseas.
extended the age range, I think, to 29. So
yeah, and there might be people, I can't see everyone's photo, right? I can't judge age, but you might fall within that age range. So I would encourage you to apply.
All right. Well, again, thanks, Christine.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. We'll be in touch.
Thanks. Bye.